Helena Zhao couldn't believe it when she was chosen to take part in China's National Day parade. The 13-year-old was one of thousands of students selected to march through Tiananmen Square on Tuesday. Due to health reasons, though, Helena had to pull out. She'll now be watching it on TV as China showcases its military and national pride.
I feel very happy about living in China during this harmonious time. It's a good country for people to live and study.
And she's not alone.
Well, basically, every Chinese they feel the effects of the rapid economic development. So in general, people feel happy, people feel proud of their own achievement, the achievement of the country, of the republic.
It's a far cry from the decade-long Cultural Revolution launched in 1966, when Mao Zedong declared class war. Soon after it ended, the country embarked on reform and opened up to the rest of the world. And it's now the world's second biggest economy. But experts say China's still lagging behind in science and high tech. Economic growth has also fallen to its slowest pace in nearly 30 years.
I would say the biggest failing of China over the last 70 years has been that suppressed growth in the first few decades of its existence, and that economic growth and productivity and living standards were so much lower than they could have been just because of the result of poor domestic policy settings, and that arguably is still true today.
While domestic factors remain a challenge for Beijing, it's now locked in a costly trade war with Washington. Both countries are also at odds over Taiwan and the South China Sea. Diplomatic relations are tense as President Xi Jinping pushes his country to play a bigger role on the global stage, like with his signature Belt and Road Initiative. It's a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure and development project that aims to connect China with the rest of the world.
Back at home, Xi's been waging a massive crackdown on corruption. And last year, he further tightened his grip on power when China scrapped presidential term limits, meaning he can stay at the helm until he dies.
But clouds remain on the horizon for the ruling Communist Party. Expectations for a breakthrough in trade talks with the US are low. And months of anti-Beijing protests in Hong Kong show no signs of dying down. Samantha Vadas, TRT World, Beijing.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by Anne Lee in New York. She's an economist and professor at New York University. She also wrote the books What the US Can Learn from China and Will China's Economy Collapse? Welcome back to the program, Anne. Now, there's no doubt that China has had a remarkable rise over the last 70 years, but economic growth in the country has slowed down over the last few years. Do you think China's growth will continue? What can we expect from China over the next 70 years?
I believe the growth will continue to slow, but that is actually normal. You've got an economy that is very, very large, and for it to continue to grow at its previous growth rates would be impossible, really. They were growing at the rate of like a Saudi Arabia economy every year. And so obviously there are limits to that. But I think that even though it slows, I don't see it collapsing necessarily. China is full of technocrats that run its government, and they have perfected a lot of policies and have a lot of levers to keep various growth engines going. And so I see that China still has a promising future, although many challenges ahead, given that there's a geopolitical rivalry going on with the US.
Yes, let's talk about that, because the whole premise of US President Donald Trump's trade war against China is that while China is reaping the rewards of opening up its economy to the world, he says China isn't playing by the same rules as countries like the US and others. Is that a fair assessment, and do you think China will change its ways?
I don't think that's a fair assessment. Whatever the US accuses China of doing, actually the US does itself. So when it accuses China of huge industrial subsidies and that's not fair trade, well, the US does exactly the same thing. The US subsidizes its companies like Boeing, Google gets many military contracts that are non-competitive, really. So the U.S. actually does a lot of the same things China does. What is really happening is that the U.S. has national security concerns about China, and that's coming from the military because they're fearful that if China's technology capabilities continue to advance, that would become a national security threat down the road in which China can engage in better espionage of the U.S. Interests and military capabilities. And this is really what's at the heart of it.